Hey, welcome to Real Estate Resource. Thanks for stopping by. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. I really hope you enjoy this video. So, good morning, everybody, and welcome. Today, we're going to talk about contingent sales from both sides. When we're writing an offer, that's contingent on a buyer selling a property. And we're going to look at when we're selling a house, that is contingent on the seller finding a replacement property. So those are the two things we're going to look at, and kind of everything that goes around it, and how we want to be careful on timelines and things like that. The reason I want to talk about this again, I do it, every 6 or 8 months where we cover it, is because, especially with the prices where they're at, more and more of our deals are contingent on one side or the other. And if we don't prepare for those timelines and follow the steps, it gets really tricky. And it's, a lot of juggling, and transactions are tough enough as it is. And we don't want to put ourselves behind the 8 ball because we missed a step, right? Or did something that wasn't 100% correct. So with that, I am going to share my screen. So what you guys should be looking at right now is the disclosure regarding agency relationships. And as I tend to do whenever I do a new class or we start a new topic, I just remind you guys about the disclosure regarding agency relationships. We're not going to be talking about the BRBC or anything today, because this is just a very specific topic of contingent sales. But with the disclosure regarding agency relationships, just a reminder, it is all it is a disclosure. It is just to allow the client to understand how they can be represented by an agent, as a buyer's agent, as a seller's agent, or as an agent representing both buyer and seller. And in the case of that dual agency, both buyer and seller, I must have the permission of either of the parties, of both parties, right? Seller and buyer. That's all this is. It is not a thing to bind you to work with anybody. It is just that, a disclosure, and that's all it is. The reason I have the purchase agreement up is because I want to show you the portion of the purchase agreement that needs to be included when the sale is contingent on the buyer selling a property. Okay. And that's here in paragraph 3L9. You have to make sure that this box is checked to make this offer contingent on that buyer's sale of their property. And what that will do is it will include this form into your transaction, which is the contingency for sale of buyer's property, the COP. So what this does is it now creates that contingency and all of the time periods and requirements that go along with that contingency. Okay? So we're going to look at it, from the very beginning. This is an addendum to the purchase agreement. Now, if this is being included with your offer, then it is an addendum to the purchase agreement. If it's being added later because of some other, hey, things changed, we are now going to sell a house to buy it and we're going to negotiate it, we could incorporate this later into a contract, and maybe it would be part of an amendment of existing agreement terms, or it shows up in a counteroffer as we negotiate. But for now, this one is an addendum to the purchase agreement, because 99.9% of the time, we're submitting it with the offer, okay? The agreement, the offer date, so let's say that our offer was written today. That's the offer date that's going to go in here. The property address, we'll just stick with we've been using the office address, right? And it's Pico. Okay, so we'll stick with that. That's the buyer's name, pretty easy, right? We'll do this quickly. That's okay, because I can type, which is not super quick. The buyer's John Smith. The seller is Bob Seller. Okay. This is the address of the buyer's property. So we'll just say it's 123 Banana. It's in Downey. And That is 90241. Okay. So that's the buyer's property that's going to go here. So this is the property that we're writing the offer on, that this is now part of the transaction. This is the buyer's property that's for sale. Now, here is the buyer's property contingency. This agreement is contingent upon A, this is the default, buyer entering into a contract for the sale and closing escrow on buyer's property. Paragraphs 2 and 4. That means paragraphs 2 and 4 are going to apply. Okay? Or if this is only contingent on entering into a contract, you're not worried about closing, which I don't know that anybody would choose that only, then you could check this box, which is it's only selling it, not closing it. Or if, let's say, you've already sold it before we wrote an offer, which, as we look at this strategically, that should be your first choice is, I have a buyer, I have a seller, I've put that seller in escrow, we've accepted an offer already, and now we're going and looking for their replacement property. That should be the right order, right? Sell the house first, get into escrow. Now let's make them a buyer and go out and look. And if that's the case, if the preferred method of them being a contingent buyer is that, then you would check this box, which means we're only contingent on our ability to close that down leg. Okay? And if that's the case, if we check off that box, then we're going to fill out all this information. Who the escrow holder is, what the escrow number is, right? And what the actual close date is going to be on this. So let's just say it's March 15th, right, or 16th. Okay? So we fill out that information. And then we either send the escrow evidence with this offer, which is the information you can see right here, a copy of the contract for sale of buyer's property. So I need a copy of the accepted RPA and all the counters. And the information for the escrow number is attached to the COP. So all like escrow instructions, the offer, everything that has to do with that, we send with the offer and the COP. Or if you check this box, 2 days after we get acceptance. So you could say, well, I want to wait till we get our offer accepted and then we'll send it. It's up to you. I suggest that you send it with whatever information you have to show proof that you're already in a viable escrow, and moving forward, that's what we're going to do. So as we look at this first paragraph, paragraph 1, by default, it's both, right? So if you are in that position that your seller has convinced you, let's go find a property before we sell a property, you write an offer and you include this, then your offer is, without checking any boxes, it's got 2 contingencies. Contingency 1 is entering into a contract to sell. Contingency 2 is actually closing escrow. Okay? Now, with that, when we look at it, if it's A, then we're going to look at paragraphs 2 and 4. Those are they're going to dictate some timelines. If it's B, we only look at paragraph 2. And if it's C, we look at only paragraph 4. So if you've checked this box in C, you can just jump ahead to paragraph 4. Okay? You don't have to do anything else. You jump right ahead. But let's say that it isn't. It is A, right, where we have to get into contract. So by default, there's 17 days for you to sell that property. Okay, that's what you have. I have 17 days to get my property that I need to sell in order to buy yours. I have 17 days to get into escrow. You could change that, but remember that affects the strength of your offer, and then again, the desirability of your offer. It's already kind of lower on the totem pole because it is contingent and you haven't sold it yet. You're not in escrow. By the earlier of the time specified in 2A, which is that 17 days, or within 2 days after buyer entering into contract for the sale of buyer's property, buyer shall deliver escrow evidence to seller and escrow holder. So what they're saying is, it's not only that you have to remove the contingency, you have to, by day 17, get your house in escrow and supply all the escrow evidence to the seller and to escrow. So that means the purchase agreement that you accepted and the escrow evidence, okay? Or if it's earlier than that 17 days, let's say you sell it in the first 5. Within 2 days of accepting that contract, you've got to provide all the escrow evidence. Okay, so that's what paragraph 2 is telling you. Paragraph 2 is saying you got 17 days to sell the property, right? You have 17 days to enter in a contract, or if you enter into contract, once you do in that period of time, you have 2 days to provide us evidence that you've entered into that contract, that you sold the property. Okay. Questions about paragraphs 1 or 2 so far? Take a little break for you guys. Anybody? Questions? No. All right. So let's talk about paragraph 3, because paragraph 3 would only really apply if you're in this section of probably A 1A or 1B, where it's about the entering the contract. This is if you haven't even. This is if you've listed or haven't listed. It's got the information. So, buyer has signed a listing agreement for buyer's property with, or shall within 3 days after acceptance sign a listing with Century 21 All-Stars, right? Buyer's property is or will be submitted to the MLS in the geographical area where buyer's property is located, or buyer's property will not be submitted to the MLS in the geographical area where it's located. So it could be a choice if it's not going to be in the MLS. Think about what that looks like, though, on the upleg purchase when you're trying to buy a property. You're saying, oh, I'm contingent on selling my property. I haven't listed it yet. I'm going to list it, and it'll be listed within 3 days of you accepting it, and we're not putting it in the MLS. Probably not the smartest thing, but I would suggest that if you're writing offers, you probably already have it listed. Just leave it as it is. Buyer shall deliver to seller evidence of both the listing agreement and, if applicable, the MLS listing within 1 day after acceptance. If buyer's property is already listed with a real estate brokerage, or if not already listed within 1 day after listing with the real estate brokerage. Okay, so you got to show proof of the listing. But if you're in escrow already, this part is not an issue. Like, you don't have to worry about the listing stuff because I'm already in escrow. If you don't check, if this is not the box you're checking where, hey, we've already sold it, all we need to do is close it, then you're going to have to provide not only the purchase agreement stuff when you get it, but you're going to need to do a copy of the listing agreement also. Okay. Questions about paragraph 3? Nah, pretty straightforward, right? Paragraph 4, close of escrow of buyer's property. If 1A or 1C applies, buyer has until the following time to close escrow on the sale of buyer's property. Either 1, the scheduled close of escrow of seller's property, which means, so if I get my offer accepted today and we have a 30-day escrow, right? So we're looking at March 27th or 26th, right, as our close date. I have to close escrow by that day, or if checked, no later than 5 days prior to the scheduled close of escrow of seller's property. Once buyer's property closes, buyer can no longer use this contingency to cancel the agreement. So if I am a listing agent and I'm receiving an offer that is contingent on the buyer closing escrow on their property, if this is not checked, I am going to counter, do a new COP, and I'm going to make sure that this box is checked. I want their contingency period to close has to be 5 days prior to the close of mine, because if we're supposed to close on let's say, for example, the 27th of March, then I need that one to close on the 22nd in order for us to close on time, right? Because the money has to get transferred. We have to, the buyer probably has to sign loan docs. All kinds of things have to happen, and that's going to be the process. That's when they could do their walkthrough, all that stuff. So if I'm a listing agent, that's what I'm checking. If I'm a buyer's agent, I'm checking it too, because it makes my offer stronger, that I'm not going to delay the escrow. Because if we leave it as the default, as the close of escrow of seller's property, then that means that we're going to have to delay if you guys don't close on time. Does that make sense? So check that box, no later than 5 days. Questions? Okay. Status of sale of buyer's property if 1A or 1C applies. Buyer agrees to keep seller informed about the status of the transaction for the sale of buyer's property, including any changes, modifications, addenda, or amendments to the terms of the accepted offer, or delays to or removals of contingencies within 2 days after seller's written request, but no earlier than the applicable time to remove contingencies in the contract for sale of buyer's property. Buyer shall deliver to seller evidence of removal of those identified contingencies. So, you have to, as the buyer on your contingent purchase, you've got to provide them updates on the up leg, which means when the buyers remove their contingencies on your down leg, you got to show them proof that those contingencies were removed. If the seller sends you a notice to perform to provide those things to you, you've got 2 days to provide all that evidence to them and any other updates or any changes. So think about the idea that if you have changes, if you excuse me, if you extend the escrow, if you change the price, if you change the financing, if you change any terms of that original agreed upon, credits, anything, I know it sounds like, well, what does it matter as long as we close? You still have to notify them. You still have to give the seller an update on those changes to your down leg transaction. Yes, Jesus, go ahead. Can't hear you, buddy. Sorry, Jesus, we can't hear you. So while you figure it out, I am going to answer Virginia's. Good morning to all. Kyle, when we provide proof of accepted offer on their current home, do we have to send a copy of the accepted offer or a copy of the net sheet, a copy of the offer itself? You have to send them a copy of the offer that it's been fully executed. So yes, you do have to send that to them. Do you have to provide actual copies of CR1, CR2? Yeah, because it wants proof of the contingency removal. So you'd have to give them a copy of the contingency removal that was sent in by your buyer. Okay, let's see if Jesus figured out his issue. Go ahead, try again. Don't think it's working for him. Well, type it in the chat if you get a chance, and I'm going to keep moving on. Okay. So now we've got that one. It's going to close. We have that we have to update them on everything. Now we have paragraph 6, which is cancellation of buyer's property. Okay. If buyer's property is in or enters escrow and either party to that escrow gives the other party a notice of cancellation of contract, buyer within 2 days thereafter shall deliver to seller written notice of that cancellation. So if there is a notice of cancellation either from me as the seller or the buyer on the property I'm selling, I have to tell the seller on my up leg that that cancellation was sent within 2 days of that cancellation being sent. So you have to keep them up to date on everything that's happening. If I don't close my down leg on time, do I get an extension of time addendum or modification of terms? No, it's always extension of time. The modification of terms is only for your listing agreement and only for your BRBC. For anything with changing or requests, then you use the form. So like if I need to extend escrow, extension of time amendment. If I need to change something in the transaction, it is an amendment of existing agreement terms. Okay. So I have to let them know that I was canceling. Okay. If my transaction cancels, and we'll get to the, it could mean that the seller has the right to cancel on me. Okay. And we're going to get to that in a moment. Now here, backup offers and seller's right to require buyer to remove contingencies or cancel. Here's the part that we have to pay really close attention to. Backup offers. After acceptance, seller shall have the right to continue to offer the seller's property for sale for backup offers. So understand that even if I accept your offer as contingent, I get to continue to market my property active under contract. Now, I know you could do that with any offer. It doesn't matter if it's a contingent offer or not. I can keep my property active under contract. But in this case, what happens is if I get a backup offer, depending on what we have checked off in paragraph 7C, I can send you a notice to remove your contingency of sale, your loan contingency if there is one, and show me proof of funds to close the escrow without selling your house. And if you can't do that in 2 days, then I get to move on with the other buyer that I had the backup offer with. So by default, if we look at paragraph 7C, if we go down here, time to give notice to remove contingency. Seller shall have the right to invoke the notice provisions in 7B, which is, hey, remove those contingencies and move on. Immediate right to notify anytime after acceptance. So if nothing is checked in paragraph 7C, I can accept your offer today, put it on the market as active under contract, get a backup offer on Saturday, and send you a notice on Saturday, right? Send you a notice on Saturday. And if by Monday night you can't remove the contingencies, on Tuesday I could move on. So from having your offer accepted today to being out of escrow by Tuesday, because this was what was part of the plan. Now, if I'm a seller's aid listing agent, I'm perfectly happy with that clause remaining the way it is in 7C. C2 is a delayed right to notify, which means in the first 17 days, they can continue to offer it for backup offers. They can even accept, they can even accept backup offers. But they have to wait until day 17 before they can send me that 2-day notice to say, we're going to accept the backup offer instead. Can you do the steps that are necessary, which is remove your contingencies and show me proof of funds, and do that in 2 days? And if you can, then they have to stay with you. If not, they cancel and move on. Okay, that's the most common one. Most of the time, listing agents don't have an issue with it. Most of the time, it's not an issue. It doesn't make your offer less desirable. The one that is a problem is this one, which is no right to notify buyer. That means at no time can I accept a backup offer and then ask you to remove your contingency until this contingency period is up here for selling your property. Okay, so my suggestion is, if you want, as a buyer's agent, it should always be this, that you write your offer asking for that. If you're a listing agent, you could counter either one. Make it immediately. Like, I don't want to. Now, if I were a listing agent and I got an offer that was one of these where it was A, where they have to sell it still and they have to close escrow, and we considered accepting it, I would make sure that my counter made that the COP was this, that the COP was immediate right to notify the buyer. Because you still have to sell your house. I don't want to be on the market that long. Like, we don't have to be locked up, right, while you sell it. But worst case scenario, delayed right to notify, the 17 days, that seems fair to go with that contingency. Okay. For the removal of contingencies, they can only be removed in writing like any other contingency, right? That's normal. There's nothing special there. Here's the seller right to cancel. Seller may cancel this agreement in writing as follows: after first giving buyer a written notice to remove buyer contingencies and provide proof of funds if buyer fails to take all actions specified in 7B, right? We just talked about that one. If giving a notice to buyer fails to enter into contract for sale of buyer's property within the time specified in 2A. So if it's 17 days, I give you a notice to perform, you didn't get an offer accepted, I have the right to cancel as seller. If after giving notice to perform, buyer fails to close escrow for sale of buyer's property within the time specified in paragraph 4, right? So you don't close 5 days prior to our close or at our close, then I send you notice to perform, I can cancel and move on. If I give the buyer notice to perform and they don't deliver the escrow evidence to me within the time specified in 1C or 2B, then I could cancel. If I give a notice to perform to the buyer and they don't give me the evidence of the buyer's listing then I can cancel. If buyer fails to deliver evidence of removal of contingencies in the sale of buyer's property, if you don't give me that proof that the buyers remove their contingency, I can cancel. If buyer gives notice to seller of either party's cancellation of contract for buyer's property. So if the buyer sends you a cancellation, you have to tell me. And if you tell me, I have the right to cancel. And that's one of the things that I always have a conversation that I talk to, I remind agents of, because we'll have a conversation like, oh man, I'm contingent. I have an uplake, but I have a backup offer and my offer is going to cancel. So I'm just going to hurry up and open escrow. It doesn't matter. You hurry up and open escrow. You have to tell that seller on the uplake, the listing agent, that you canceled. They can cancel on you no matter how many backup offers you have or how quick you're going to get back in escrow. You have to understand that that's the case. So you have to prepare your buyers for that. In the chat, if the seller is allowed to continue to market the property, does the seller have to be in active under contract status? Yes, they do. It has to be active under contract. If it is just active, that could be a violation for the MLS. And then the buyer's right to cancel is just during their contingency periods. Whatever they can't find, or they can't sell their house, they can't close escrow, and that contingency is still in place. That's all. They can cancel. Okay, based on the contingency. The time periods. This is where we have to pay attention also. By default in this contract, the time periods in the agreement for inspections, contingencies, covenants, close of escrow, and other obligations, including those in the addendum, shall begin as specified in the agreement, which means they start when the offer starts. Right? The norm. Hey, we got our offer accepted today. We have 17 days from today to remove all our contingencies. But if this box gets checked, then all of those time periods for the buyer and the seller don't start until after the buyer removes their contingency of selling their property. Okay? So the problem with that is that if you do that, your time periods all get delayed. Really, the only reason you would want to check that is if you hadn't sold your house yet. If you've already gotten an escrow, right? You've already sold it. You're in escrow. All you're doing is contingent on closing. Then you don't need to check that box. Now, if I'm a listing agent and I get an offer that has that box checked, I'm going to counter it to the time period starting at the beginning because we don't want to delay it. Okay. And the same thing goes for the deposit. The deposit is either as agreed upon in the purchase agreement or within 3 business days after the escrow evidence and the contingent removal. I would leave it alone. So there's nothing to change in 11A and B. Okay. And then you have signatures. And this is where you could use the notice as the seller. You send this as notice. The seller signs it and you send this. Okay. Any questions on the COP? No? All right. So let's look at it from the other side. Now I'm the seller and I'm accepting offers on my property and I'm contingent on finding a replacement property. Okay. So this is the flip side. In most cases, this is not going to be an addendum to the purchase agreement unless the buyer's agent provided it with their offer. Otherwise, it's going to be attached to the counteroffer because when I get my offers as listing agent, I'm going to counter that it's contingent on us finding a replacement property, and then I'm going to incorporate this document. Okay? So the SPRP, that's what it's for. It's for finding a replacement property. Now, it doesn't have to be purchase. It could be a lease too. All we're doing is building in a contingency to say that I'm not going to move or I can't complete the sale unless I can find someplace else to live. So it doesn't have to necessarily be a purchase. I know it says seller's purchase of replacement property, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that. You can use it for a lease, let's say. Okay, so let's look at the first section. The same as the other ones, what's the date of the offer or the document that it's attached to, the property address, the buyer's name, the seller's names, okay? So number 1 is finding a replacement property. That's the first contingency. This agreement is contingent on the seller entering into a contract to acquire a replacement property or identifying a suitable property to move to. Finding a replacement property contingency. So you see that's where we talk about leases or rentals. Seller shall within 17 days after acceptance remove the finding replacement property contingency or cancel this agreement. Seller shall deliver to buyer at time of removal of finding replacement property contingency proof of replacement property, either a copy of the contract for purchase of a replacement property and the contact information and escrow number for that purchase, or a signed lease or rental agreement for replacement property or other written evidence of replacement property. If seller does not remove the finding replacement property contingency in writing within that time, buyer, after first giving notice to seller to perform, may be able to cancel this agreement. So you just have to give proof. So I got 17 days, and when it's time for me to remove my contingency, and I do that, I give them proof. Not just remove my contingency, but I have to provide proof that there is a replacement property. I can't just remove the contingency because I need to and still try to figure out another way for another contingency to give me an out. I have to provide proof that there is a replacement property, that it exists. And I've had in the past listing agents that were adamant that I don't have to provide information to the buyers and the buyer's agents about my uplake property, and it's not true. You absolutely do. You have to give them proof that that property exists, which means if you're buying a house, you have to give them a fully executed offer that shows that it was accepted and what the escrow number is in order for you to be compliant with finding a replacement property. Okay? If it's a rental, then you got to provide them a copy of the signed rental agreement or lease agreement that shows you have a place to go. And that's just the truth. If you don't do that, let's just say I send you a contingency removal only, but I don't give you everything else. As buyer, I can send you a notice to perform saying I need you to give me the proof of the replacement property. If you don't do that in 2 days, cancel it, I move on. Okay? So keep that in mind. Or let's say that you did find a place like we talked about before. I've already found a replacement property. I'm going to check this box. Here is the escrow company and the escrow number. So we're Pacific Escrow and escrow number. There, here's the proof. Now, this is the one that confuses people, is the close of replacement property. Right? Because people look at it and go, wait a minute, well, how can I close? How can there be a contingency to close if it doesn't close until after the downlay closes? Well, it's because it's not actual closing. It's contingent on the ability, on seller's ability to close escrow on replacement property according to the contract. This is a contingency in favor of the seller. Seller, by the scheduled close of escrow date for the replacement property, shall either close escrow or remove this contingency in writing. So really what it's meaning is it's your ability to close escrow. That's it. It's not the actual closing. It's the ability to close. It's worded weirdly, and it becomes confusing to people. Okay? So let's say, for example, that the escrow gets extended for some reason, or they can't close on time. You could send them a notice to perform when it gets past that close of escrow period because you're waiting on them to close. And if they can't close, you could cancel on them, or they could force them to remove that contingency by sending that notice to perform. So it's just, that's a tricky one, but you still want to make sure that as seller, you have that one in there, because it's your ability to close. And to be honest with you, if I'm the listing agent that's representing the seller that's finding or purchase a replacement property, that close of replacement property, if I'm to the point where I'm got a clear to close, I'm going to remove that contingency. There's no reason to hang on to that any longer. Okay. Questions so far? Okay. The time periods. This one is the reverse of the COP. This one, the default is that the time periods don't start until we remove the contingency of finding a replacement property. I suggest that we flip that and we make sure we check the box that says remain as specified in the agreement. Okay? For that and for the buyer's deposit, both of those things. We don't want them to be delayed until I find a replacement property. That doesn't help me any. I want everybody working. So I want the buyer to be doing their inspections. I want everything to be happening as it should. I want to provide disclosures. I want that deposit in escrow. I'm not waiting. So in this one, opposite from the COP, we need to check these boxes. Okay? Now, the next section here says close of escrow. Parties agree that seller may extend the close of escrow date for the sale of seller's property for a maximum of, so I usually suggest 30 days here, right? So when the offer comes in, it's going to come in with a 30-day escrow. Now it's contingent, so we got to figure there's no way it's going to close in that first set of 30 days that were in the offer. And what happens is that buyer's agents and listing agents, instead of using this section or understanding how this section, paragraph 2C, works, they try to, in their head, calculate what it would take, right? So they're writing these offers with 45 and 60-day and 90-day escrows because they're contingent. Instead of that, I have this one that says I have 17 days to find myself a replacement property. Okay, we've accepted an offer that's a 30-day escrow. So now 17 days comes and goes. I do find a place and I remove my contingency. Now, because I put in here close of escrow shall be extended by 30 days, when I remove my contingency, when I give you the contingency removal and send you an extension of time addendum, basically our 30-day escrow starts right there because I just did a 30-day extension. Right? So now we're 17 days in, which means there's basically 13 days left. So now we have a 43-day escrow basically that we probably don't need, but we didn't have to kind of guess at an escrow period. We don't have to guess at an escrow period when we wrote the offer, because now we're doing it based on making sure we have enough time after the offers are accepted. Okay? And if we do it like this, the buyer can't refuse that extension. Once they've agreed to this document, and I give them a contingency removal and the extension agreement, they have to sign it because they already agreed to it. If we didn't have anything here and I asked for an extension after I removed my contingency, the buyer wouldn't have to agree. Not that they wouldn't, but they wouldn't be compelled to. Okay, so you want to make sure you add this in here for that 30 days. Let's see, in the chat, what if the buyer has all his loan approval, appraisal, and at value inspections done, but the seller has not found a replacement home and they keep pushing you to remove all contingencies? Do we still have to do that even though they don't have a home yet? Yes, depending on what the time periods are. If you're past, so let's say your contingencies were 17 days and this was filled out as that the time periods remain as specified in the agreement, if you're past the time period and they send you a notice to perform, you have to remove the contingencies whether or not they've found a replacement property. That doesn't change anything. Now, you could send them a notice to perform to remove their contingency or finding a replacement property, but ultimately what's going to happen is they're probably going to cancel on you, or you're going to have to cancel. They won't, but you'll have to cancel on them to move on. But them having you removing your contingencies while they still have that contingency in place to find a replacement property doesn't affect your deposit. Like if it ends up canceling because the seller can't find a replacement property and you've already removed all your contingencies, they can't then turn around and say, well, we couldn't find a place, but you've removed your contingency, so we're going to keep your deposit. It doesn't work like that. You're still going to get your deposit back. Unfortunately, you're going to be out the inspection cost and the appraisal cost, but that's normal. Hopefully that we're all having that conversation with our buyers anyway, that when we're doing our consultations, we're telling the buyers, hey, by the way, you may spend money on an appraisal and a inspection, and the deal may cancel, and that's not money that you're going to get back. The seller has no obligation to provide a refund on that stuff if it cancels. They're not obligated to. Okay, so yeah, they can still compel you to remove your contingencies even if they haven't removed theirs. Okay. If seller's replacement property is in or enters escrow, or there is another agreement and either party to that escrow agreement gives the other a notice of cancellation, seller within 2 days thereafter shall deliver to buyer a written notice of that cancellation. So just like you do as buyer's agent, seller's got to do the same thing. If their uplag cancels, whether that's a lease or a purchase, they have to let you know within 2 days. Even if, like for all contingencies, even if we go past the 17 days, if nobody's removed those contingencies in writing, that contingency is still in effect, okay? So you got to keep that in mind. It's not like, oh, well, you're past 17 days. It's just like any other contingency. So the buyer's right to cancel after I give the seller a notice to perform for removing their finding a replacement property. If I give the notice to perform to the seller because they failed to give me proof of their replacement property, okay? If seller gives notice to buyer of either party's cancellation of the agreement for replacement property, the buyer can cancel. Note, if seller is unable to meet the obligation for other timeframes in the agreement, such as for close of escrow, buyer may cancel as permitted in the agreement, even if this contingency is not removed. Okay, so you're not going to be held hostage by the close of. Okay. Seller's right to cancel. Seller may cancel the agreement in writing by invoking their contingency, right? We can put it in there that we can cancel based on our contingency. Hey, day 17 comes and goes. I haven't found a replacement property. We're just going to cancel because it doesn't look like we can find anything. We're going to wait, or we're going to move. We'll start looking now and find another buyer, right? I can cancel. I have the right to do that as seller. Now, I mentioned a minute ago, there's nothing that compels the seller to pay it. Now, we can put in here a request if we send the seller's purchase of replacement property. Like, so for example, I'm the buyer's agent. Okay. And I had a conversation with the listing agent, and the listing agent says to me, we have a contingency. We're going to be contingent on finding a replacement property. I could write my offer and include the SPRP and do it with terms that I wanted to, and add in here that they're going to return any deposit, and after delivery receipts, buyers shall be entitled to reasonable out-of-pocket for inspection and appraisal fees. I can ask for that, or I can ask for an amount, like say, okay, well, hey, it's instead of not all of it, but maybe you guys can give me $1,000 back, right, to reimburse whatever it is, whatever your costs are. You can request that. Doesn't mean the seller has to accept it. Right? If I'm the listing agent and I receive it that way, I may counter and say absolutely not and put a new SPRP. Maybe I counter with a less amount that you get something back. But that's why I said earlier, there's nothing that compels the seller to do it. If they put it in here and they accept it, terrific. They're going to reimburse you something. Okay? But if they don't, after the fact, you can't, there's nothing that you could do to get that money back. Okay? Questions? Any other questions? No? Okay. So everybody signs and we're happy. Now, here's the thing that I always like to include is the seller license to remain in possession. When there is a contingent sale, well, first of all, with any sale, if there is a seller that lives in the property, you have to assume that they are going to remain in possession for a minimum of 3 days after close of escrow. I don't care how much that seller swears to you up and down as listing agent that they're going to be out before or at the date of close of escrow. I don't care how much the listing agent tells you, no, don't worry, they're going to be out. This is an issue for the buyer more than it is for anybody else, because the buyer assumes if I get this house, if I close escrow today, it's my house today, I get to move in tomorrow. And that doesn't happen most of the time. So with any seller occupied property, we're going to include this SIP. Always. Always, always. And it's going to be a minimum of 3 days after close of escrow. Now, it may be zero cost to the seller for those 3 days, and we're going to go through it a little bit. But I'm going to give them those 3 days no matter what. Even if the seller listing agent tells me they don't need it, I'm doing it because I want to prepare my buyers for the fact that they might still remain there. And if they don't, if they get out on time, great, even better. But at least I'm prepped, because it's the worst when it's flip side where we're all prepared for escrow to close and they're going to be out when escrow closes and then they're still there 4 or 5 days later. That's where the problems happen, right? You get phone calls from your buyer. I'm going to call the police. I'm going to do all these crazy things, right? That we know that don't change anything. So with a contingent sale, though, I'm looking at something more like a minimum of 10 days. Because I'm going to close escrow today. Then I have to wait for that money to get wired to the other escrow. Then I have to sign loan docs, have to do my final walkthrough, have to close escrow. That seller has probably a 3 days after close of escrow. The seller on the upleg has a 3 days after close of escrow. Or if they're contingent, maybe they stay there longer. So there's, like a domino effect there. So I want to start with a minimum of 10, maybe just to be safe. They don't have to have it, but maybe 14 days just to say, okay, we know that there's some things that are going to happen in order for you guys to move out. But this has to be addressed at acceptance, not after the fact. Not, I got an offer accepted and now all of a sudden we got to negotiate. This has to be done at the beginning. The reason it happens best at the beginning is because everybody's kind of on the same page. The seller's like, yeah, I know I need it. The buyer's like, I want to get my offer accepted. Everybody's kind of in the same place where there's easier to make the agreement happen. Once you have an agreement, now it changes. If I'm the listing agent and I go back to the buyer and say, oh yeah, you guys accepted we accepted your offer. Now my seller needs to live there for 2 weeks after the close of escrow. That's a harder sell to the buyer because that's not how they were prepped. If it happens at the beginning, it changes things. So you have to be prepared for that. And like I said, when it's a contingent sale, I would say that you're probably looking at a minimum. I used to say 7 to 10 days. Now I just go flat 10. And I don't think it's crazy to have 10 days at 0. And if you start getting to 2 weeks and the full 29 days here, that's a little harder sell on the 0. But I don't think that's crazy. So I'm 10 days. This is the consideration. No charge. You're going to have 10 days to move out of the house that we're purchasing. Okay. It's probably going to be part of this counteroffer, right? Down here, we have to make sure that we have a delivery of possession fee. That if they don't move out on time, we'll release this from escrow back to them so they have some money. Whatever that amount is that you feel comfortable with, that feels like, hey, this is just a motivation for you to move out. This is just stating that the seller's going to continue to pay all the utilities, or they're not. Understand, too, as seller, when you're here, you have to make the property available to the new owner with a 24-hour notice. So if I allow you to remain for 14 days after the close of escrow or 10 days after close of escrow, and I got construction workers or I have people that need to come in or I need to get in, you're a tenant now. You have to give me access if I give you 24-hour notice. Okay? So make sure that your sellers are aware that exists, that's not their, it's not their home anymore. It's somebody else's. They are an occupant of somebody else's home, and they have to live by the rules like any other tenant would. The other one that people miss is this. By default, with an SIP, I'm supposed to give keys and anything else that's necessary to have access to the property when we close escrow. Even if I'm remaining in possession for the next 14 or 21 days, I have to give to the new owner a copy of the keys and any other thing they need to access the property. Most people don't know that, don't pay attention to it. But there's a little box right here that says, if that's the case that I'm going to stay here, we're going to check the box and I won't give them the keys and everything until my possession is up. Okay? That's it. So make sure that as a listing agent, you're checking this, because I don't think your sellers are going to be happy if we close escrow and the buyers and the buyer's agent are demanding their keys and contractually they're required to do it. The seller can't assign it to anybody else or sublet it during that period of time. It seems like common sense, but it's in there. Insurance. Seller's personal property, including vehicles, is not insured by buyer, and if applicable, not by the owners associations, against loss or damage due to fire, theft, vandalism, rainwater, criminal or neglect acts to others, or any other cause. Seller is advised to carry seller's own insurance to protect seller from such loss, and to contact its own insurance carrier to discuss available options. So just understand that the property is insured now by the homeowner, by their homeowner's insurance, but if something happens to your personal property, like the house gets broken into and they steal all your stuff, that homeowner's insurance is not going to pay for it. Okay. As for the final walkthrough, I usually still do a final walkthrough 5 days prior to closing escrow. However, should we plan to have a second final walkthrough before full possession? You can do. I think that, first of all, you have to do your final walkthrough. You have to do your final walkthrough prior to close of escrow. Sorry. Sorry, I hit my my AirPods and they chose to connect to my phone and started playing music in my ear. So I couldn't hear anything but music. You always your final walkthrough, even if the seller's going to remain in possession. Okay, that's not an option. They're going to be there, but you want to see what the condition of the property is before you become owner. Yes, I mean, you should do a kind of a move out inspection to make sure the condition of the property is there when they move out, but it's not really a condition of them actually moving out. You just have to, this is what the condition was before we closed, and now this is the condition after they move out. They're going to be responsible for whatever damage is done or any issues. You could write that in there, that you could add to write in the contract, negotiate it that you're going to do. You could put it here in the SIP that there's going to be a final inspection of the property before they move out. One thing that we need to add here in other terms and conditions: seller agrees to pay a per diem of $150, $200, $100, whatever it is, if seller remains in possession beyond day 14 after close of escrow. Now, the reason that I put that in is because just in case there's an emergency and something happens. Stuff happens all the time. We would do that no matter what the period of time was. If it was 3 days after close of escrow, if it was 10 days, if it was 14, if it was 29, or if it was whatever, right? We would put this per diem in place just in case something happened where the seller had to remain a day or two after. The reason that we want to do this is two things. It's actually a protection for the seller. So let's say we get to day 14 and something went south and they need 2 more days, right? The seller didn't move out on their up leg. They got sick. Something happened. They can't move. So they need 2 more days. Well, now what happens is they've already agreed to pay you $300 for those 2 days, in this case. What that does for the seller is limits their liability. So if I don't have anything in place, let's say I get to can't move out till day 16. And let's say that the buyer's agent can prove they had damages. They lost out on a moving truck. They had to pay extra rent. They had to sell all kinds of whatever they could come up with. And let's say that they prove that 2 days cost them $3,000. If they have proof of that and those damages are true damages, and they go to small claims court against the seller, they will win that $3,000. But in this case, because we agreed to this $150 per diem, the most they're going to get is the $300 because they agreed to allow me to remain for that $150 a day. So this is more a benefit to your seller in that way, that it protects them from loss. For the buyer, the reason you want to have it in there is because now I don't have to prove any damage. You just are paying me for remaining in possession of the property past the contract agreement. So now it's just there. You've already promised me that you're going to pay that. I don't have to prove that I was damaged. Even if I wasn't damaged, I'm going to get that $300. So there's the benefits to both sides. Okay? So please make sure that you're including these SIPs with any property that has a seller in possession. If you're a listing agent, you want to make sure it's countered in and add those days in. If it is contingent, you want to really look at that 10 or 14 days to make sure that you have enough cushion to get that seller out on a contingent sale. Okay. Any questions? Anybody have any questions? Let's see. What do we have here? From the SRP question, if the seller credits the buyer any money, is the seller entitled to a copy of the appraisal and inspection report? Good question. The inspection report, you're always entitled to that. Even if a deal cancels, they have to give you that. The appraisal, no, unless it is an FHA or VA deal. If it's FHA or VA, they're required to give you the copy of the appraisal regardless. In a conventional loan, the only way they would have to give you the appraisal is if it didn't appraise and they were trying to ask for a reduction in sales price. Or in your counteroffers, which I suggest all of you do, you say in the counteroffer, buyer to provide a copy of fully completed appraisal report along with appraisal contingency removal on whatever date you're having the appraisal removed. Ask for it. Now, if you make it part of the counter, then absolutely they have to give it to you. Okay. Let's see. Oh, okay, good question. How is it guaranteed? It's still not like, it's not like, oh, here it's written, so I'm going to hand you a $150 check. What I mean is that if you do have to go to small claims court, you don't have to prove anything other than here's the contract. They owe me $300. Escrow won't hold any money back because there's no specific timeline. Now, if, for example, the seller says, hey, I'm going to be there for 14 days, you can have 10 days for free, but we're going to pay you $150 a day for those 4 days. Then escrow can hold it back. Then escrow can hold it back. If it's like a specific time period that we're charging for, then escrow could. If you were charging for all of those 10 or 14 days, like you were charging $100 for the whole time, then escrow could hold it back. But when it's a per diem like that, like a holdover amount that we were looking at, you can't, because you can't calculate. You don't know how long they're going to be there. But what I mean is that they've already agreed to pay that. So when you go to small claims, it's not proving anything. It's just showing on the contract. Let's see. Can you clarify on the SPRP form the 17 days and the additional days the seller gets for the close of escrow? Do those days run the same? I'm not sure I understand the question, but I have 17 days to find a replacement property. That's the default on the seller's purchase of replacement property, right? So I have the 17 days to find a property. If I find a property in that 17 days and I remove my contingency of finding a replacement property, then I send an extension of time for 30 days to add 30 days to our escrow. So everything's running the same time. From the time of acceptance, I get that 17 days for my finding a replacement property. In that time, the buyers are doing their inspections. I've provided disclosures, all of that stuff. Everything's all happening at the same time. So if I needed to change that, it would be like any other contingency. I could request an extension of time where I say, hey, instead of 17, I need 21. Buyer doesn't have to agree to it, right? Once this is accepted. So you've got to make sure you're doing all this stuff at acceptance when you're there. I hope that answers your question. I'm not quite sure if that was what the question was. Anybody else? Anybody else? All right. Fantastic. I appreciate you guys being here. I know that taking an hour out of your day, you guys are busy people, and you need to make money, and I get all that, and I really enjoy that you spend time with me, because I think that this stuff makes you guys so much better, your understanding of this. If you missed any of it at the beginning, or you just want to review, it'll be on YouTube later today. If you guys could do me a favor and just like those videos on YouTube, share them, make comments, it helps me to get more viewers on there. So I appreciate that help too. Thank you guys so much. Have a great day and go out there and be productive, and I'll talk to you soon.